Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Yes, my friends, welcome to today's Toddcast, the Todd Huff Show. No matter where you're listening, whether that be on podcast or on one of the radio stations that carries this program, it's a pleasure to be here today. Friends, I know the vast majority of you know what we're fighting against, but there are some who have tuned in here, and there are some people that you know who live in your neighborhood, who work in your office, whose kids go to school with your kids or grandkids or whatever, people that show up for the family reunion that have no idea what we're fighting about here in this country. They have no idea how the government and what I call the 7 pillars of propaganda have been weaponized to create this culture of radicalism that's now being supported. It's being openly supported. The lawlessness is being supported by people who, in some cases, are governors and mayors and attorneys general around this great nation. And I want to talk about this. I want to talk about what we're up against. And hopefully, I know, listen, for the vast majority of you, you follow this, you know what's going on. This is just going to be a reminder. But for some, this could be like a metaphorical slap in the face. And I say good to that. We need the metaphorical slap to the face. All of us that are coming to understand what we're up against have had that moment at some point in time. I remember when mine came 20-some years ago, 25 years ago, when I was on that horse farm, listening to Rush Limbaugh. I remember distinctly just where I was on that farm as I was wrestling out some of the things he was telling me, saying on that program about the people and the threats that exist in this nation when it comes to, well, attacking your liberty, your nation, your prosperity, my friends. And that's what I want to talk about today. This is not random. This is not, it's organized. It's coordinated power at multiple levels, including our government. And it's not a grassroots movement. So I want to start by talking about this Signal chat, which I referenced yesterday. That's where we're going to start, my friends. But before we do that, friends, if you're dealing with discomfort or if you're just tired of living off of prescription medications and managing those side effects, you're not alone. A lot of folks are looking for something natural they can trust. That's why I want you to check out Christopher's Organic Botanicals, a family-run natural kratom company rooted in truth, tradition, and transparency. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. They lab test everything before it ever reaches your hands. There's no hype. There's no synthetics. There's no funny business. Just the real thing done right. Real kratom, my friends, is tested. It's responsibly sourced. The horror stories that you have undoubtedly heard about kratom come from shady sellers and synthetic garbage that really isn't actual kratom, real kratom at all. So, do your research. You can research anywhere online. Of course, make sure you're finding reliable sources. You can go to Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com to get information there. And once you're comfortable and realize that this is something that you want to try, you can start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Use coupon code ToddHuff. You'll save 10% off your first purchase. Again, Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency, my friends. All right, let's start here today. I referenced this yesterday. There was an anti-ICE Signal chat, or plural chats, that had been exposed by an independent journalist named Cam Higbee, who many of you have undoubtedly heard of. He coordinated, I should say, after infiltrating these groups, he's uncovered a lot of information. He's sharing it on his social media channels. There's information in the stack of stuff. If you want to Google this or whatever, you can, of course, do that as well. Just look for, I guess, Cam Higbee Signal Chat or Minneapolis Anti-ICE Signal Chat groups or something like that. You'll find this information. But again, it's on the website. And it'll be in the newsletter, by the way, too. For those of you who want kind of the documented, I guess, the original sources or background information or a summary of the program, the Todd Talk delivered to you every day, which some of you may not hear the Todd Talks, and that's a good way to get those. And then a way for, sometimes I don't have time to get to everything I want to on this show. Sometimes I'll have an additional longer article in the newsletter. You can sign up free for that, and that's a great way to have all the stuff that you might want to look at later or dig into on your own that you just can't get while you're listening to the Toddcast here. ToddHuffShow.com is where you'd sign up for that newsletter, and that's where you'll find the stack of stuff, which is what I call the list of articles that we have cited during the program, or even things that are just background information. Sometimes they agree with me. Sometimes they're as neutral as I can find. Sometimes they're echoing the same argument I would give. Sometimes it's the opposite perspective. I'm just trying to give you information because I know that you can handle it because you've tuned in here. You're not one of the folks out there, the low information voter crowd that has no idea what to do with information. So anyway, that's both in the email and on our website at toddhuffshow.com. So here's what we found out. Here's what Cam Higbee's, expose. Every time I say that, I'm reminded of the Impractical Jokers. I love that show. Anyway, but there's an expose. He's exposed these folks for what's going on. So what are these anti-ICE groups doing in Minnesota? Well, they are coordinating, tracking, and response to federal law enforcement. Yes, if you're a leftist who's tuned in here today, you might be shocked to find out that ICE is federal law enforcement. And so these groups have been created, signal groups, which are, these are pretty secure chat groups, and that's why they use them. It's kind of hard to do what Cam Higbee did here, to infiltrate it, unless you get invited or whatever. They're encrypted end-to-end messaging and so forth. But this is, they're designed to track and to organize response to federal law enforcement agents who are working to deport criminal illegal aliens in the city of Minneapolis, the state of Minnesota. By the way, think about that for a moment. These folks are defending criminal illegal aliens. See, these folks, some of these folks are truly the worst of the worst as far as humanity is concerned. These are people who are violent, who have harmed children, who have been in gangs. These are the worst of the worst, and some of these lunatics in Minnesota are circling the wagons to protect them. They have an organized structure. This is not spontaneous protest. That's what needs to be known from this whole thing. None of this is spontaneous. This is organized. And why is it organized? It is simple why it's organized. Number one, we're over the target, metaphorically here. The Republicans or the Trump administration, I shouldn't say Republicans at large, because a lot of Republicans are, candidly cowardly, like many of the Republicans here in my state of Indiana, who didn't have the courage to fight through with redistricting. And those folks are going to face, by the way, primary challenges, including my state senator, Rod Bray, who this is far from over, the consequences of this. Excuse me. And I should tell you, I did finally get a response. I'm not going to mention this long. I did finally get a response from Rod Bray's office, some sort of I don't know. It was this ridiculous email weeks after the fact, almost like I did something wrong by sending to the wrong email address or what. Just silly nonsense. These people are, I'm tired of even pretending like some of these arguments are even remotely legitimate in a sane world. But I did finally hear back, but it wasn't of anything of substance. And wow, if we would have known, media channels should have come through this way. And I had so many messages I couldn't, whatever. You hid from your constituents. I went to your office in person. You didn't show up that day because you wanted to run and hide. And that's the truth. So anyway, my friends, I don't want to belabor that or be on that too much longer. But the point here is that none of this stuff is simply grassroots. This is organized. And we Republicans, that's what I started to say, conservatives, let's say the Trump administration, we're over the target. Because the target is elections. The target is being able for them to find a way to remain in power. And how do they do that? They do that by pumping in illegal aliens. That's one way that are absolutely, without any doubt, finding their ways onto the voting rolls. And then they're basically paying these refugees or these immigrants through these programs for their vote. I mean, there's record of this. There are comments about this. There are people out there who are Somalis who are saying, if you don't, we're not going to continue to vote for you, sort of thing. So this is the strategy that they have. And this is for the survival of the Democrat Party. I don't want to overstate this because, believe me, I am fully aware that there are radical leftists and absolute idiots running around out there who are casting ballots. I understand that. And I understand that they vote for people for reasons that they don't even understand. There's a lot that goes on into that, I should say. A lot of things that cause people to cast a ballot. Everything from they feel like it's, that they're making a morally virtuous statement by voting against Trump and standing with their community, whatever rhetoric that you hear from these anti-ICE protests and these groups and so forth. Sometimes that works with these folks. Sometimes they just don't want to get in front of the buzzsaw. I mean, you can't underestimate that either. How many people listening to my voice have either felt a little bit or maybe a lot of intimidation, or somebody that has, and you think, man, I'm not stepping in front of that. I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm going to keep my job at work. I'm going to roll my eyes after we have some big corporate meeting about, pronouns and everything else, or white guilt and white fragility. You play the game, but you are just totally appalled by the nonsense happening in your company or in your community or whatever. But a lot of people just sometimes go along to get along. But we're to the point, my friends, we can't do that. There is no, again, when I was a young man, I became a follower of Jesus when I was 15 years old. And I remember it was at a Fellowship of Christian Athletes football camp. And, they constantly looked for ways to communicate with young people at that camp about the message of Christ. And I remember one skit they did. This is, my friends, close to over 30 years ago, actually. They did a skit, and it was the typical skit where you have a person, and then you've got the angel, so to speak, the godly presence speaking truth. You should do this, you shouldn't act like that. You got the satanic side, the demonic side that's tempting you and all this stuff. And the kid basically said, I don't know what I want to do here. I'm just going to sit on the fence. To which the demonic presence said, good, because I own the fence. The point is, there's no fence sitting on some of these things. And we've reached a point here in this fight where there can be no fence sitters. If you're sitting on the fence, hear me say this, and this may offend some of you. If you're sitting on the fence at this particular point in time on these core issues, you are actually on the wrong side because they own the fence. they own the fence sitters. The fence sitters are actually complicit because the fence sitters are not actually doing anything to stop what they're doing. And I know it's not pleasant for some. I'm empathetic. I understand personalities. I understand that I can get on here and say things that some people would never dream of saying. Maybe in their heads, maybe to their closest friends, whatever. I get it. I understand. And believe me, listen, there are, just told my kids this the other day. They're one of my kids. Part of being an adult is knowing when I can behave in certain ways. There's times I can still be silly and fun as an adult, but I can't do that constantly all the time. You have to understand the context of what's going on. There's a time to be serious. There's a time to be playful. Part of being an adult is knowing when I can do those things. And there are certain circumstances where I'm more reserved. I'm not saying that there's ever anything wrong with that just across the board, but if we find ourselves constantly just in a position of either being afraid or just simply we don't speak up for whatever reason, we say I'm a wallflower, I'm someone who prefers the background. At some point, you don't have to be vociferous, I get it, but at some point, if you're sitting on the fence, if that's an accurate depiction, then I think we all have to say that I'm complicit. And the good thing is we can change it today. It's not a permanent decision. But what we're fighting here is off the walls, just, I don't want to say unbelievable because it's exactly what I think we should expect. It's organized. It's paid for. It's not spontaneous. It's not authentic. It's not grassroots. And by the way, this signal group, this anti-ICE signal group, included journalists. Think about that for a minute. Journalists are in here. I saw videos of people driving around Minneapolis, and they would show across the street their vehicle was being followed. They were not ICE, by the way, but people thought they were ICE. So they were probably being communicated or tracked on this app, and it was being shared with the group, and they're parked somewhere or whatever, and they look across the street, and a cameraman is setting up his camera across the street, like a TV news guy. I forget which station it was. I don't know if it was MSNBC. I don't remember who it was, but they were setting up across the street. And the reason that they were setting up across the street is because they were getting the messages. Think about that. Journalists are embedded in these groups, and they're part of the process. They're part of the process. So a journalist sets up across the street because with their camera, then people show up with the whistles and start blowing them so that anyone who's being pursued by ICE or Border Patrol or whatever, they can be alerted to the presence of someone that may be ICE. In some cases, these folks are not ICE. I've seen people being shaken down and intimidated on social media. They have gotten a rental car. People swear they're with ICE. They're not with ICE, but the people in the groups surround the car, try to intimidate the person, tell them to get out of here. And they're not even with ICE, my friends. These people have lost their minds, but there are lots of people inside these groups that are not just radicals. Well, they probably all are radicals, but they're not all just the activists. You've got the journal, at least the overt activists. You've got the covert activists as well, the journalists, political operatives, politicians, by the way. They use encryption as a shield to try to protect that. They've been exposed. They panic. Now they're worried about it. Kash Patel says an investigation's coming and that these folks should be worried. This is not a grassroots sort of response. This is orchestrated. This is paid for. This is what we're up against. And so this is what we're fighting on the ground. It's not grassroots. There is not peaceful protest. That's used as a legal firewall to protect this. They're saying we're just protesting. Just like the way that this tragic shooting, which we talked about yesterday on this program, the way it's been framed in the media, peaceful protest. The guy at best the gentleman who was shot here over the weekend, at best, he was obstructing ICE while carrying a firearm. Listen, I'm not saying that it should have gotten to the point that it did, but reasonable people should be asking the question, why are you physically getting involved with ICE, obstructing their ability to do their job, their constitutional and legal authority to do what they're doing? Why are you doing that? And you're doing that while armed, and then you find yourself in a situation where you're being physically detained by ICE or Border Patrol, whoever it was, federal agents, and in that chaos, an officer sees the weapon, thinks you're going for it, or whatever is happening there, and they fire their weapon. And then of course, once that happens, they're going to fire until you're no longer a threat. It's absolutely terrible. But this is not peaceful protest. We have to know that we're being manipulated. We're being gaslit on what peaceful protest is. So, and in the media, they're claiming that they're just observers, when in reality, they're participating. They're participants in this because they know when they show up, things happen. By the way, I've got an update on what happened at City's Church, and it's worse. It's dramatically worse than we even think. Well, I should say originally thought that it was. I'll get to that in due course here. As we get through the program here today, my friends, politicians deny knowledge of any of this stuff. I don't see any of them condemning this behavior. In fact, I see some of their names. We think some of these politicians are in this group. Law enforcement is framed as the aggressor, as the problem. And that's really what we're up against and what we're facing here. You've heard me talk about the 7 pillars of propaganda. I'll get to that today, my friends, as well. But before I do that, friends, let me ask you, would you rather take 2 soft gels a day or spend hours in a doctor's office talking about your cholesterol, your bad cholesterol? Because I know what I would choose, and that's why I have Salty here. In fact, I carry it with me every day. Take it after lunch. Salty is an all-natural, clinically proven dietary supplement. It lowers cholesterol, no prescriptions, no doctor's visits. It's not a drug, but it's been proven to lower cholesterol. May be able to do the same for you. Check it out, Soltea.com, SOLTEA. Promo code Todd will get you 50% off, and it will get you free shipping, as 50% off your first order, free shipping on all orders. Again, Soltea.com, SOLTEA, promo code Todd. Timeout free, my friends. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. You know, you heard me talk about the 7 pillars of propaganda and how they've been weaponized against the American public. That's kind of what we're seeing here with the Cam Higbee's exposure, and good work for him, from him, by the way, as well, my friends. But he's exposed an element of this that we knew, in a sense, that these sorts of things were happening. But he's exposed it, and it's good work. I mean, there's a lot that can be taken from this, a lot that can be learned, that can be used to get on top of these things earlier in other parts of the country where they are undoubtedly being used as well. So I'm going to talk about the 7 pillars of propaganda, though, my friends, and that's what I'm going to do here in a moment. But friends, there are a lot of companies out there that don't share your values, your Christian values, your conservative values. The good news is that you do not have to invest in them. At 48 Financial, they specialize in biblically responsible investing. They'll help you screen out companies that go against your faith, your values, and create a plan that's tailored to your goals. And they'll handle the heavy lifting for you so you can focus on what really matters to you. If you want to see if your current investments align with your values, all you have to do is head on over to 48financial.com/Todd. Again, that's 48financial.com/Todd. You can take a quick assessment, and they will show you to what degree your current investments align with your values and your beliefs. 4-8 financial, because your values matter, and my friends, so does your money. You've heard me talk about the 7 pillars of propaganda, and multiple pillars of these 7 pillars show up in this story we've been talking about today. First, we've got the government. What do I mean by the 7 pillars of propaganda? I've talked about this before, but I think it's important to understand what we are up against, and it gives us practical avenues, and it gives us kind of a visual. I can't do visuals over the audio podcast or the radio, but I can paint pictures, word pictures here. It gives us word pictures to work with. It gives us some sort of framework to understand where we're being attacked from, and it begins to give us the foundations on how we can respond. So when I talk about the government, I talk about bureaucratic, well, in this particular case, bureaucratic hesitation to handle it, but also you can say bureaucratic corruption, where you have politicians that appear to be in this group. There's also this degree of plausible deniability. There's also this level of fighting about federalism, which I've never heard a leftist care about federalism unless it helps them promote one of their morally bankrupt ideas. And it also gives them mechanisms by which to prevent enforcement of the law. So when I talk about government being used in one of the pillars of propaganda, I'm not just talking about the politicians. I'm talking about the bureaucrats behind the scenes. I'm talking about the campaign managers. Here's looking at your office, Governor Tim Walz, and people that work on your campaign who then orchestrate and apparently lead or have a very high level leadership or influence in an organization like this behind the scenes. Government is being weaponized against us. It's being weaponized against us. We're looking at it in this. It's a case study in Minnesota. Tim Walz sent in the National Guard, but what did they do? They handed out donuts and coffee to the protesters. That's a true story. I feel bad for the guys who got deployed to do that. They're being treated as political pawns here. That's not actually going to solve any problem. But anyway, we've got the government, which is one of the 7 pillars of propaganda that's being weaponized against us, and it's being used to shield the people who are using signal here. In fact, it's being used with access, I would say, to certain politicians, maybe direct involvement of these politicians. Another one of the pillars of propaganda is academia. Academia is run by leftists. We have, it's interesting. I find there's nothing wrong with a formal education. There's nothing wrong. I talk about this from time to time on here. But there is something wrong with having the sense educated out of you. My dad had a term that I have stolen from him that I use as well. He calls these folks overeducated idiots, to where they have gone to so much schooling and have not used schooling to complement what they've learned in real life. No. They use schooling to say this is how it's supposed to work. Ignore what you've learned in real life and just stick with what the leftist lunatics running your college, running your classroom, what they've taught you. And that creates an environment where you have people who have degrees who have 0 degree of sense. So we see this happening even in high schools. A high school here, just on the north side of Indianapolis, Carmel Clay Schools, they staged a walkout over what's happening in Minneapolis, Minnesota. By the way, I'll tell you that Carmel Clay School District is in a very Republican area, although I don't know that I would call it conservative. I would call it maybe Rhino Republican. But, of course, there's certainly conservatives up there, but not in as high of a percentage as I would like to see. But you have students leading walkouts. Walkouts are treated as virtue. Civic ignorance is encouraged. I mean, how many things have we been told that are based, that are predicated upon the American people simply not knowing? Simply not knowing things that we should have learned in school. Things about what a protest is and what it isn't. And you can't impede law enforcement from doing their jobs. And that storming a church, which I'd like to get to in the final segment, Storming a church is not a right to protest. In fact, when you learn the details, you realize it's even more evil than it sounds at first. But we've not been taught these things. We've been stupefied on purpose because a stupid population is easier to manipulate, easier to lie to, easier to get to believe you, because a lot of people, this happens a lot of times. They think, well, I don't know what goes on in the government. That's above my pay level. No, it's not. It absolutely is not. This government, you're a stakeholder in this government. And I would say if they can't explain to you, to your satisfaction, what they're doing, then that's on them. And you'll have my support. Even if you're a leftist, you'll have my support if your government, if your officials cannot explain it to you to your satisfaction. Legitimate satisfaction. I'm not saying just to be obstinate. But if they can't, that's on them, not on you. So academia has played a role in this. One of the 7 pillars of propaganda. Entertainment. Oh, boy. Entertainment, my friends. Didn't I see, when I think of entertainment, I think of the NFL, I think of Hollywood, people who are entertaining us. I saw that there was, well, first of all, the NFL has stuck its nose everywhere with Black Lives Matter and everything else, the kneeling during the anthem and so forth. But they have entertainment, and of course, Hollywood, the storytellers there, the people who make our music. I say our music as though I'm part of that, but the pop culture's music. I don't know really anything today that's in pop culture music, and I kind of like it that way. But I do know that the music today is, if you listen to the lyrics, it's designed to make people accept things that are morally reprehensible, at least in some cases, I would say in many cases. And this shapes the thinking of our youth. It leads us to a culture where young women go to social media to brag about their quote-unquote body counts and stuff. Just wild stuff to me. Stuff that's totally reprehensible. And it creates this false sense of morality. That's what they've done. People in entertainment have said that the good guys are the ones who are protesting ICE, stopping them from doing their jobs and so forth. Of course, the media, another pillar of propaganda. They launder the language. They strategically omit certain things. They blur the lines between activists and protesters and rioters. They participate. They pretend like, and the ones that are in these signal chats, that this just happens to be a tip, when in reality they're in there and they're part of the messaging, part of the strategy, my friends. So that's what we're up against. There's 3 more pillars. I'm just out of time. I'm up against the break here. You can look more. I think we've got some stuff on our website about the 7 pillars of propaganda. Maybe I'll even put that in today's newsletter. We'll see, time permitting. But friends, let's be honest, when your financial world starts getting a little more complicated, you need more than one-size-fits-all advice. That's where Full Suite Wealth shines the brightest. Their team specializes in working with families and individuals at your level, offering personalized guidance that goes far beyond the basics, from private equity and private credit to options, strategies, and coordinated legal planning. Full Suite Wealth helps you see the big picture and make confident decisions about your legacy. It's all about having a dedicated team guide you each and every step of the way so you can focus on what matters most: your family, your goals, your future. If you want real confidence in your financial life, head on over to fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. Time out for me, my friends. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I told you I was going to try to get to this. I know I didn't get through all those 7 pillars of propaganda. I tell you what, I'll write a little bit about that in today's newsletter if you want to hear more about that, because that's honestly, when it comes to strategically what we need to understand, that's important. But I also owe to you an update on something else that's been happening that I told you I was going to get to. So I'm going to get to that now. Here we go. This is at townhall.com. Headline written by Amy Curtis here. New horrifying details about the leftist mob invasion of city's church come out. Friends, it's bad enough that just the idea of what they did at the church in Minnesota. And we've talked about this, right? They storm a church because the pastor or one of the pastors on staff there is employed supposedly by ICE. That's bad enough. They take over the service. We've been gaslit about it. One of the leaders who was arrested said that, they sat there and watched services and then engaged respectfully after the fact. That certainly does not appear to coincide with anything that I've seen in the videos. But listen, these folks believe that the ends justifies the means. So they don't care that they lie and deceive and gaslight. They think they're in the moral high ground here. In fact, Todd talked today. I talked about this lunatic nurse in Florida who took to social media. Lexi Lawler, I think was her name. She needs fired. She needs to have her nursing license 100% revoked. She's out there calling for, clamoring for, cheering for, wishing Caroline Leavitt. I can't even repeat what she said on here. I didn't repeat it in the Todd Talk, but I summarized it. But basically, this nurse is hoping that Caroline Leavitt is permanently damaged from having her second child. And she's a nurse. And this is all because of political disagreement. These people have lost their absolute minds. They have fallen in love with moral depravity, and they think they're on the virtuous side of it on top of that. But here's the article. It says this. The weekend before last, a mob of leftists, including Don Lemon, stormed City's Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. 3 of the agitators were arrested and almost immediately released by judges, while another judge refused to sign off on the arrest warrant for Lemon. By the way, I think there were 8 arrest warrants that were sought by the Trump administration. 5 of those were rejected. One of those was for Don Lemon. It turns out that Judge Douglas L. Micco is married to a woman who reportedly works in AG Keith Ellison's office. Of course he does. Now we have some horrifying new details in what the mob actually did in the church. It wasn't, as alleged organizer Nakima Levy Armstrong claimed, a calm group who joined the worship service before asking questions. Oh, yes, we had to sit down, we listened to the service, and then when the time was appropriate, we asked our questions. That's not at all what happened. It was a mob, she writes here, that aimed to terrorize the churchgoers, including children. So there's a series of tweets put out by Tyler O'Neill, and this is what it says. He's got the documents here to back this up. Horrifying new details, he writes. The invasion of City's Church was even worse than we thought. Agitators blocked stairs. Oz, listen to this. So parents were unable to get to their children at Sunday school. And that would be reason to be concerned, wouldn't you think? Especially in this world of terrorism and everything else. One told a kid, do you know your parents are Nazis? They're going to burn in hell. That sounds like a nice church discussion to have there with the children. William Kelly, quote, DeWoke Farmer, I guess that's his alias, I guess, DeWoke Farmer, shouted, this ain't God's house. This is the house of, just his words, not mine, the house of the devil is what he said. About 50 members of the congregation were stuck towards the front of the church. Not only did the agitators, I would say the trespassers, the invaders, take over the service, but they made it nearly impossible for parishioners to get out and leave. So they held them hostage. Hostage takers now. One woman, this is a 4th tweet from him. One woman broke her arm. One woman broke her arm. This is a peaceful protest, by the way. Congregants were, quote, terrorized. Our children were weeping. College students and young women were sobbing. It was impactfully, and it will take time to work through. That's, again, not my words. I'm reading here from the tweets. An agitator continued to scream in the faces of young children while they were crying. That seems like a very loving thing to do. Nakima Armstrong, this is the 6th tweet in this thread. A main ringleader said City's church cannot pretend to be a house of God while harboring someone who is directing ICE agents to wreak havoc upon our community and who killed Renee Good. And then his last tweet here in a 7-tweet thread, which again, you can find this article on our website at toddhuffshow.com, or you can search for @Tyler2 O'Neill. That's who tweeted these things. 7th tweet in this says, make no mistake, this church invasion was an atrocity. Sadly, Democrats like Jacob Fry are carrying water for the agitators. Judges denied arrest warrants for 5 of the 8 charged defendants. But Harmeet Dillon says this isn't over. Stay tuned. So that's what a peaceful protest looks like to a radical leftist. Folks, this is what we're up against. I'm just telling you so that you understand we have to defeat these people. There is no compromise. They must be defeated politically, culturally. I gotta go, SDG.